Hello and happy Wednesday, my Facebook clan. I am not used to doing this many live videos in a week, so I had to sort of find some time where I would be able to record today's episode. But as you know, I am completely determined that I will finish this by the end of September, and so by going live at 11:19 on a Wednesday, that's going to happen. So yesterday was my birthday. And I had a fantastic day. It was just unbelievably overwhelming, actually, to see all of you reach out on Facebook. And so thank you so much. I know the lighting's kind of weird because I've got a lot of sunlight coming in, but today's chapter is interesting. This is the only chapter in the entire story so far where I can honestly admit that there's been a little bit of writer's block because it's just been very difficult to sort of convey what happened next in my story. Not because it's like hard to tell, it's hard to put into words. I've done my best. This is a lengthy chapter, so buckle in, and I will try to keep it as sort of succinct as possible. But this is chapter 27, The Breakthrough. And before I get started, and I'll give her more accolades at the end, a huge, huge shout out to Jessica Butts, who really sparked this entire part of my life. So more on that to come. Chapter 27. Have you ever had an aha moment that hits you like an actual slap across the face? I think that we've all had them, and I think it happens sort of fairly often, actually, if you're open to change and you're seeking possibility in your life. But each of us has particular moments, we know that we do, of that aha, where we can look back and say, oh my gosh, yeah, that's when it hit me. So I've talked about many of my aha moments throughout the story, and each of them really was an aha. You know, you can have many, right? But there was an aha that occurred in my life only a few years ago, actually, that was so transformational that it has to be considered one of the greatest ahas in my life, so far in my life. And so in the last chapter, when I talked about wanting acceptance from people that I didn't have it from, if that makes sense, I mentioned that I didn't really share that with anybody, right? I was definitely keeping that to myself. And I did keep it to myself. I really didn't share that. And the question of why I couldn't just have their acceptance and be enough for them, just lurked in the back of my mind all the time. And overall, I can definitely say that it made me feel almost good enough. In my mind, I had created this sort of thing that if I had everyone's love and acceptance, well, then that's all I needed. That's all I needed, right? So the them was actually a host of people that included family members, former friends who were really close, and a bunch of sort of just various groups that I had once been very involved in or with and super close to. And there was a lot of people on that list of them, or, their, Theyre, their. Why can't I have their love and acceptance? This was in the last chapter. Okay, so what happened is that this nagging thought really morphed into an actual mindset that sort of took over. And what it became was this idea that I was good enough for some people, the ones who loved and accepted me, and I just wasn't good enough for those that didn't love and accept me. And the impact and implication and effect, really, of possessing that mindset was awfully curious. For example, it was curious in the sense that, like, it started impacting my life in curious ways. When I would meet somebody new, I would bring up being gay and my former Christian background in one form or another within the first few moments of meeting them. And it was because I wanted to know right then and there which group they were going to fall into, the the group that loved and accepted me or the group that didn't love and accept me. And that's kind of weird looking back. Another impact is that I began doing basically anything and everything for the group of people that I did love and accept me because they loved and accepted me, right? And I wanted that. So I just started kind of doing whatever for them. And we'll get to more of that in just a sec. But I can honestly say that my boundaries were out of control. It was like the disease to please on steroids at this point. If somebody loved and accepted me, and I really do mean basically only pertaining to the gay thing, if we can address that and you say that you love and accept me, well, I'm just going to hold you in high regard and you can be in my circle, all of you, and I'm going to do anything and everything for you. And it's interesting because it's not just people pleasing. It was like almost as if I was my way of thanking them or rewarding them in some way because they loved and accepted me. And I did this with anyone who loved and accepted me, even if I really didn't like them. That was just sort of pushed to the side. If they said they loved and accepted me, okay, great. How can I be yours? Basically, is what started happening. And I began accumulating people in my life that I typically wouldn't really be around or hang out with, quite honestly. But because they gave me love and acceptance, I would just kind of say to myself, well, at least they love me. At least they love me. When I was writing this was a little detour that I didn't expect I would take, but I decided to add it because something really occurred to me when I started thinking this through. I think those are really interesting words, at least. We use them all the time. Maybe we don't even pay attention, but we do. We use them all the time. And often, very often, at least is used in the form of optimism, right? So you trip and fall and you're badly hurt and you say, well, at least I didn't break my arm. Or, your house or your car is broken into. It's a lot of times it's sort of negative things that we use at least. But so your house, your car is broken into and you say, well, it sucks, but at least they didn't steal that. When we use the words at least to convey optimism, sometimes they actually aren't needed at all. This really occurred to me. And I started really thinking about it. And if you'll go with me on this, I personally kind of think now that the words at least are a little bit of a slippery slope sometimes. Why? Because their intent, when we say at least, their intent is to immediately distract from what happened or the person or the situation, however they're being used. At least is used to direct us elsewhere, right? Now, one might ask, why is this even a problem? We're talking about the words at least. Are you kidding? Well, maybe not if we're talking about some of the more common ways that you hear at least, maybe to cheer someone up or whatever. But I'm really talking about kind of how we use them when we speak to ourselves. But even for the small things, consider what happens when you don't use them. This is really interesting. You trip and fall and you're badly hurt. Or your house is broken into and that's an awful thing, right? The feeling without the words at least is kind of just like, wow. You're really kind of forced to just be with it for a moment. Sometimes, instead of saying at least, actually a lot of the times, we really just need to stop. We need to pause, we need to just be, and we need to listen. I'm bringing this up because we are so trained in so many ways to deflect and direct attention away from us and what's really happening to us in our lives. And one of the ways we do that is with at least. And we do it in so many other ways, but we're so trained to do that, and it happens in a variety of ways, that rarely do we actually address how we feel, why we feel, and what we feel in that moment, because we're just so trained, at keep going. Now, don't hear me out. There are times when we got to keep going, but you're going to understand a little more what I mean in just a minute. We're just so trained. Well, at least this. And sometimes we just don't sit with it, and we should. We move on, and typically, very typically, we build up walls and safety mechanisms around whatever happened so that we can prevent it from happening again, right? That's kind of what happens when we just say at least. When we deflect, we go somewhere else, and we don't address what happened or how we feel. Okay. I know it seems ridiculous. I'm making such a big deal about this. But the reason that I'm doing it is to address the fact that when we're hurt, or when we're stuck, or when something isn't working, one of the very worst things we can do is ignore it. And a lot of us ignore it a lot of the time. This looks very different in all of our individual lives, right? But we ignore how we feel, and we use these mechanisms like at least to just move on, and we get away from it. I certainly do this. I still do it all the time, but I was really doing it when it came to this whole why don't they love and accept me thing. And there's a lot of reasons that we do it, but the biggest is this really. Dealing with fear or pain or trauma, anything uncomfortable, is that. It's just that. It's uncomfortable. So who likes to do that? Who likes to be uncomfortable? Nobody that I know. So instead of being with ourselves, sharing ourselves, addressing ourselves, doing anything that makes us uncomfortable, we use mechanisms like at least to just numb whatever it is and move right on. All right, so about that aha moment I was talking about, the big one. What starts with that woman and an idea that I talked about at the end of the last chapter, chapter 26. Her name was Jessica Butts. She's not dead. Her name was Jessica Butts, and I was working as the director of broker development for Windermere Kirkland, and I had helped put together this business retreat. And it was away at a beautiful resort. And we had hired Jessica Butts to do a presentation for us because we'd heard from a lot of people that she was an incredible speaker and did a phenomenal job of engaging her audience and empowering them to set goals and really work towards achieving them, right? Fabulous. That's just what we need. It's going to fit perfect into this business retreat. From the literal moment that this woman walked into this really big conference space that we were in, I could actually feel the energy in the room change, noticeably change. I remember that there was about 10 minutes left on this break that we were, on before she was going to speak. And so she had arrived like 10, 15 minutes prior, about 10 minutes, I think. And I think there was about 45 people in attendance for this little thing. I mean, it wasn't huge, but there's a few people. And I remember that Jessica made her way to the front of the room. No one's really paying attention because they're on this little break, right? And because I was one of the people that was putting this together and whatnot, amongst others, I went up and greeted her. So I remember walking over and introducing myself and saying, thank you so much for coming all the way out here. And while I was talking, I remember that she looked me directly in the eye. We just had this moment, and I stopped talking, and she said, wow, I am really glad that you're here. And I remember saying like, oh, me too. And in my mind, I was like, what are you talking about? So the session started, and she began her presentation. And from the moment she started talking, I don't know if any of y'all have ever felt this with somebody, I felt like she was talking and speaking directly to me and no one else. I may as well have been the only person in that room. And there was about 45. So her first book and the name of her entire movement and everything she does is called Live Your Life from the Front Seat. And even if you don't know what that means, it sounds pretty good, right? Like live your life from the front seat. The analogy for her is being in a car. So everyone, this is all Jessica Butts, and I hope when and if she watches this, she's like, oh my God, Darren, you completely botched this, but I'm going to give you a quick little synopsis of her book. Every one of us has a car, and it's the vehicle, you know, that we're kind of going through life in, and naturally, the ride is best when we are in the front seat of that car. So according to her education, she's a former psychotherapist, her background, research she's done, experience, all of it, Jessica said that based on your unique Myers-Briggs personality type, certain things that we do and don't do determine where we are in a car at any given time. Okay, so I'm liking this, right? So her description of the car included 4 seats, 2 in the front and for your driver and your co-pilot, and then 2 in the back for, I love this, for your baby in the back seat and your drunk uncle. So now she's really got us engaged, right? Like, what are you talking about? Babies and drunk uncles and whatever. Okay, so before we could even talk about the car, her next exercise was actually to help everyone in the room determine what their Myers-Briggs was. And of course, she said, for a more detailed, in-depth score, you should probably take the full assessment. And but for now, you know, I'm going to walk you through, do a quick determination so that we can talk about this whole live your life from the front seat thing. So the first time, I know I've discussed this before, the first time I'd encountered Myers-Briggs was in college, Dr. Patrick Garner, Communication 101, to this day, one of my favorite classes I've ever taken. And so for years, I had known that I was an ENFJ, kind of rare type, and Jessica Butts, standing on stage, was also an ENFJ. So we got through everyone sort of figuring out what their profile is and whatnot. And during that time, she had drugged 4 chairs into, you know, the front of the room where she's speaking. And so she's got 4 chairs, envision like a pilot, co-pilot, backseat, you know, whatever. So there's 4 chairs together. And I'll never forget that she did not ask for a volunteer, y'all. Instead, she said, okay, now I want to demonstrate front seat life to you. Darren, how about you come up here? I was like, oh, okay. And I remember thinking in that moment, I was reluctant, not because I'm shy, but because I could feel like something's about to happen. I'm not sure what's about to happen, but I don't know. I can feel it. Something's about to happen when I go up there. So she had me sit down in the front seat of this car, right? The driver's seat. And she began sharing with myself and all my colleagues all of the things that put me in my driver's seat and make me who my best self is. Now, I'm just going to pause really quick and say, read her book. I love this information, all of it, and I'm not going to do it justice. I'm just kind of resharing it here for the purpose of my story, right? So that's my little interjection there. So I'm sitting in the driver's seat. And she says, let me tell you who your best self is. This is you in your front seat. And they were things like, you protect, help, and take care of others, don't you? And you promote collaboration. And I was like, yeah, that is who my best self is. I kind of like this list, right? This is not where I thought this was going. So, and she read the whole list or whatever, and then she had me sit in the co-pilot seat. And she said, let me tell you who your second best self is. You're still in your front seat. This is you, you know, in your groove. That list included things like you make magical connections to practical problems. And you can fill in the missing pieces of a life puzzle. And I was like, gosh, this is like really true, right? Not only do I I love doing those things. Like, she's talking directly to my heart right now with this kind of stuff. Well, as one might guess, the backseat lists are not as fun. So the next chair involved me getting up and walking around to the back seat, and I sat down in the one that was behind the driver. Now, in her analogy and everything, this is where the drunk uncle sits. And it involved all of the things based on your unique personality that you really should not be doing. Like, you shouldn't be doing these things because based on who you are, well, you kind of suck at them. You're just not good at them. And they make you grumpy and agitated, just like a drunk uncle who's about to pass out in the back seat. That is the funnest analogy ever. Okay, let's learn what they are. And she began reading this list that made such sense to me. And they were things like trying to live in the moment and immerse yourself in the here and now. Yeah, you're not so good at that. And that's completely true. I'm not good at spontaneity. She said things like trying to turn work into play. I suck at that. And it makes me mad and agitated. When I'm at work, I'm at work. And when I'm not at work, I'm not at work. And it just kind of went on, and she's reading this list and I'm just like, wow. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, as long as I steer clear of doing those things, it sounds like all's going to be well, right? Great. Then she got very quiet and she said, now let's find out what happens when you don't do front seat life activities and you do things you suck at. Go ahead and slide over to the baby in the back seat chair. She calls it the baby in the back seat chair baby in the back seat, because babies they cry and they're babies. And sometimes babies just need to be held, right? And when you're not your best self and you're not in your front seat, and again, this is by personality. This isn't everyone. This was my profile. When you aren't living your life in the front seat, here's what life looks like to you. She put her hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget this. And I was like, uncomfortable. I'm rarely uncomfortable. And it wasn't because of her. It was because of this whole, what we were talking about. She said, Darren, when you do stuff that you suck at, and you aren't living your life in the front seat, being your best self, you hide from the world, don't you? And I just kind of sat there. The room was completely silent. It's almost like they were just listening, like, oh, what does he do? Like, what, like, this is almost gossipy. You could hear a pin drop. People were silent. And I sat there and I silently began to cry. Like, I did. I actually began to cry, sitting in front of all of my colleagues with this woman that I don't know. And she's telling me how I am when I'm not doing the things that I'm good at. She went on and she said things like, when you're not in your front seat, you're in your back seat, you abandon your normal extroverted feeling self and you retreat into your own world, in your own head. And you repel people by being in your head and not your heart. So at this point, I vividly remember that that's when like the silent crying stopped. I mean, this was really hitting me. Like, this was hitting me really, really hard. She could tell that it was kind of time to end this little demonstration. And she stood up and she gave me a really long hug. And then she actually side hugged me as she addressed, the whole audience. And she said, this is real, real stuff, people. How many of you have noticed that he's in his back seat? And almost my entire office raised their hand. And then she kind of started to cry. She's still hugging me. And she just said, this is why I do the work that I do. So that I can teach every one of you that you don't have to live your life in the back seat. Like, you don't have to. I can teach you how to get back up into your front seat. we're forced into our backseat all the time. And when you're back there, life feels like you're pushing a freaking boulder up a mountain. It all just seems like insurmountable. Everything seems hard and everything seems tough. And she said, that is not what life is supposed to be like. Life is supposed to be like you rolling a beach ball down the beach. That's how life was created and intended for you. Like, it's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be fun and easy and effortless. She said, but you have to show up as your unapologetic self. You have to know who you are, and you need to know the things that you should not be doing. This had obviously hit everyone in the room, and there was a lot of sniffles going around, actually. And she hugged me again, and I was still crying a little bit, so I went back to my seat. The rest of her presentation was truly incredible, and every time I get to hear her speak, I go now. But she was incredible, and she helped everyone in the room figure out what their front seats look like and how they can structure everything they do in their lives to keep them in their front seat. You can delegate, you can stop doing certain behaviors, you can cut certain people out of your life. The things that get you into your back seat, you can stop doing them. You really can. And that's her entire message. And her method includes knowing who you are and knowing where you're gonna go. Where do you wanna go? Sound familiar? And then she has a signature method of how you're going to get there. She calls it the 3S method, and it's systems, structure, and singular focus. It was brilliant. I think everyone in that room was just like, wow, this is incredible. So she wrapped up her presentation, and when it was finally done, the group had been dismissed for another break, and I walked over to her, and she gave me another hug, and I just said, thank you. Like, thank you so, so much. So the sessions continued on that day, and finally, when we were finished for the day, normally I would have, joined my colleagues, my friends, for happy hour in the bar. That's always, let's go get a glass of wine and talk and be social. That's how I always am. Instead, I actually went upstairs to my room, and I began processing all this stuff that Jessica had talked about. I remember journaling for a little while. I remember thinking, sitting there in thought and kind of being, and I kept trying to figure out, like, why am I in my back seat? Why is this? I had bought her book. I was looking at the list, That aha that I've been talking about, whether any of what I've been discussing and telling you in this whole video makes any sense, or how or why it led to this aha in this moment, I'm not even sure it matters, because an aha came to me. And it really did come to me like right then and there, and I'll never forget it. I was staring out my hotel room window, and again, thinking about this whole why can't people just love and accept me thing, and now I'm talking about the backseat thing, and it's just like all there, right? And out of nowhere, this idea occurred to me, and it was this. Maybe, just maybe, people didn't love and accept me because I didn't actually love and accept them. And it was an absolute eureka moment. And after being coupled with the words of my best friend in the world only a few weeks later, I'll tell you what, love and acceptance took on an entire new meaning in my life. And that's the breakthrough. And next week, you're going to learn a lot more about what that aha moment looked like and how I started making sense of it. And the next chapter is called The Love. So, I know it's a weird chapter, you guys, to get through, but it was, I called it the breakthrough because it was this breakthrough. And it takes kind of 2 chapters to really understand why it was a breakthrough. So don't give up on me yet. A lot more clarity is going to come in the next video. So, okay, that's it. That's chapter 27. I have 3 left, and there's not enough time to do 28, 29, 30. Yeah, there's not enough days to do them every other day. So they're coming at you. They're coming at you. So whenever I'm live, just, I guess, try to tune in and catch up later if you can. Thank you all so much. There's some sunshine out there, and I'm going to go enjoy it for a little bit. Thank you again for everyone that made my birthday special. And I have to say, right before I sign off, Jessica Butts, unbelievable. I have no words. She's changed my life. If any of this was appealing to you at all today, go to jessicabutts.com. Find her podcast on iTunes. Get her books. Take her course. Hire her. She helps you in ways you didn't know you needed help. That's her gift. Anyway, thank y'all so much. And I will see you on tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, you guys.